Hello, everyone. How are you guys? Are you okay? Hi, Stefan. Hi, Vinicius. Hi, Jane.
Hi,
Hi.
Bruna.
How are you guys? Is everything okay?
We're good, good, good.
We're
Surviving.
good.
Perfect.
We're good.
Surviving.
Very nice. Hi, guys. Welcome. Welcome to our talk about assessment. I'm really excited to be here with all these amazing teachers. My name is Bruna Perez. I work in the coordination department of Pós Estácio, and I'm really happy to be here with you. We are going to have an amazing time together talking about assessment. And guys, I'd like to know if you can listen to us. Is everybody listening? Is everything okay? I don't know if Stefan, is everything okay? Jane, Vinny? Yes?
Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, we can.
Okay, great.
Very nice. Yep. Welcome, guys. Welcome. Um, well, we are going to talk a lot about assessment, about everything related to it, and we would like to have your participation. So send us your questions, okay, here in the chat. I'm going to put it on the screen so everybody can see it. So we need questions, we need your interaction, okay? Very nice. During our talk before being here with you guys, we noticed that uh, your questions were there. You were sending us some questions, so we are going to go back there. But first, I'd like to talk to Vini. Vini, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, yes. Well, I'm Vinny, everyone. I just want to say hi very quickly to Silvania and Ikaru, who have already said hello through the chat. So, hi, it's great to see you here. I'm currently the Director of Education for the CNA Group. I'm also a course book writer. I've written course books for Fundamental 2 and Ensino Médio here in Brazil. And I've also authored 3 methodology books. I have 2 books with Cengage Learning, Getting into Teacher Education, a handbook with Catarina Pontes, and another book on assessment with Isabella Villas Boas. So, assessment is definitely an area that I'm particularly interested in. It's called Getting into ELT Assessment. And I also have a third book on methodology with Susan Holden called Teaching English Today Contexts and Objectives. And this is, I guess, a little bit about me. I do a lot of tutoring and a lot of teacher training, and I'm really happy to be here. It's great to be amongst such amazing professionals, and I'm looking forward to talking to Jane and Stefan. So I think it's going to be great.
Very nice. How about you, Stefan?
Yes. Okay, can you hear me very well?
Yeah,
All
perfectly.
right, great. Well, yes, picking up where Vinny just left off. Yeah, so it's going to be good. Looking forward to this chat. Um, I've planted trees. I've done other stuff. I haven't written any books yet, but I'm getting there. But just to break the ice a little bit. But no, really, really happy to be here with you guys. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Stefan Hughes. I'm also a professor in the courses here, at Stasio, the courses on, English language teaching, translation. Saying hi to some people already in the chat, Janique. I've seen some names here that have kind of, people have hailed me out. So saying good vibes to all of you. Thank you for watching my videos and everything. Um, there may be books coming out in the very near future. I'm going to get any spoilers right now. But I'm currently doing my PhD in applied linguistics at PUC São Paulo, working on corpus linguistics, which is one of my passions related to Twitter, related to social media and everything. So, hey, Rebecca, thank you. So this is all. It's what it's all about, and I'm really, really, really interested in technology and how technology can help learning, not just for the students but for teachers, right? So I've been in teaching for about 24 years or so, based in Rio de Janeiro, but working a lot with teachers all over Brazil, with brass tees, so with everything related to teaching. I think this is what it's all about. And here we are again, So this is going to be a nice little chat. Really excited to be able to talk to Vinny and to Jane, to hear from Bruna and from people participating as well. Okay.
Very nice. Thank you very much. And Jane? And
Hi, everyone. So my name's Jane. I'm from the UK originally. I've been in Brazil for about 27 years. And I started teaching when I was about 17 years old. I went to Germany for a year, then I went to France. So I taught children, adults. When I came to Brazil, worked in a school for about 10 years. Then I helped set up a school, worked there for another 12 years. And then about 7 years ago, I started I focused more on English language editing and translating, especially of academic articles, because where I live in São Carlos, there are two universities, so lots of people who need proofreading, translating. And I also work at Curso Estácio, and it's such a privilege to be here with you. And hello to those people in the chat. Really nice to see you all here.
Yeah.
that's great. We are very, very happy to have you all here, guys. Thank you very much. So let's start with the first question. I can't forget the question, but here it is. Let me see. Just let me find it and I'll put it here. The first question was, okay. My gosh, there are many people here. It's so nice. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Wow.
Carol. Carol just put the question here. Does formal assessment help? How about informal assessment? So I think first, the first thing we need to know is about uh, assessment in general. What is assessment? What does it mean? So I think, Vinicius, can you start answering this question?
Sure, gladly, sure. So let's start our talk by starting our talking about assessment as a concept, right? As a whole, I think it's a great way to start this conversation. And assessment is this term that we use very often without necessarily knowing what it really means. As teachers, we tend to be assessment illiterate. We don't usually get a lot of training courses, or we don't usually pay a lot of attention to assessment as a theory in teacher education courses. As a consequence, we sometimes talk about assessment thinking that it's the same thing as testing. And this is also what society as a whole considers, right? The layman will usually refer to assessment as testing. So for us to consider formal assessment and informal assessment, we first need to detach ourselves from the idea that assessment is the same as testing. Testing is one of the many subsets of assessment. We can assess students in a very wide range of possibilities. There are several strategies, techniques, and frameworks that we can use in order to assess students. And what is this assessment that takes place? It's gathering data that can be useful for us to diagnose somebody's performance, somebody's development, right? And we evaluate people, we evaluate students, we assess them all the time. And this can be done formally and also informally. And then we come to the question. But I don't know if Jane and Stefan would like to add anything else to the concept, the overarching concept of assessment, and any possible considerations that you think we need to reinforce as well.
I was just wondering what you think, and also all the participants, what they think about whether teachers should know about international exams, tests. Should they be assessment literate? What do you think?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good one. Good one. Good question. I think picking up what Vinicius said about being assessment literate, it's a very good point because we kind of take it for granted, especially if you are a teacher. You go into this profession thinking, well, okay, testing is just part of it. Yeah. So there's not a lot, even in the training programs, where they focus on assessment. They talk about the test, they talk about how you have to conduct it, how you have to carry it out, but they don't really go into explaining what it means, what you're trying to get at the end. Because in the end, assessment should be asking a question: are students learning? Is what we're doing working for the students? Right. So those are questions you have to ask yourself, and that's why it can be formal, informal. Formal because you want to have data that can be used to make changes, move forward, to give people some kind of satisfaction. The learners need to know that they are making progress and has to be based on something, based on either their own performance against a standard. There's some kind of standard there, or based on each other's performance. If they're looking at each other's work and say, okay, well, in this group, I'm doing pretty well, or we are learning at the same pace, and so on. So it's an umbrella term. It is an umbrella term, but informally, just picking up what Vinicius left talked about, we do it all the time. When students come in, they do an activity. Even if we don't tell them, even the comments we make about students' performance is an assessment. When you say informally, "Oh, that's pretty good," or "Well, that wasn't too creative," right? It's you are assessing their work, right? So there are different types, yeah, from formal, informal, oral, written, listening, etc. Different skills. You're focusing on attitudes. You can be assessing motivation. You need to understand why students are motivated to learn or not, what they're trying to get out of the learning experience, so that there can be different aspects that you want to focus on when you're assessing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like
Yeah.
to add, if I may, still exploring the idea of formal and informal assessment, that nowadays we've been hearing a lot about courses that don't have any kind of assessment, or students who don't want to be assessed. This makes no sense whatsoever, because as
Hold
Stefan just mentioned, we are assessing students all the time. So if your course, or if you work in a way that kind of like sends the message that there is no assessment in what you do, I think it's very important that you reconsider that, because assessment is not negative. Assessment is actually an essential part of what we do, and it doesn't need to be formal. So, and I'm sure that we're going to cover this in this conversation. There is a lot of criticism, and there is a lot of resistance when it comes to formal testing, especially with everything that we know about assessment today. And there is a very important debate going on whether we should be testing students in the same kind of format that we've always done. And there are a lot of people who will say that this is important because of the international exams, as Jane pointed out. It is still something that some students will have to sit, and they will have to take, so they need to be familiar with exam conditions. But there are a lot of voices who will say that tests are not necessarily the best way to assess learners. However, I personally have never met anyone who knows what they're talking about say that we don't need assessment, or that we shouldn't assess. Assessment
Mm-hmm.
needs to be there. It's present. It's what we do all the time.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the question, formal or informal assessment, they both can add a lot of insights. They both can add a lot of information to our practice, and they are very, very important. However, a lot of the informal assessment that takes place is also unconscious. And there, I think we have a challenge, because a lot of teachers assess students unconsciously. It's kind of like their second nature, but not being aware of what's happening and not being aware of what you're doing might prevent you from exploring it to its full extent. So both formal and informal assessment should be done with a very good level, a very high degree of awareness, in order to foster learning and help students develop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think
I
maybe that. Sorry, Bruno.
Sorry, Jane. No, I'm here again because there is a sentence here. I want to show you, and I want to know what you guys think about it. Assessment is a natural skill that all good teachers have. Do you agree?
Jane, what do you think? I'll let you go
Interesting.
first. What do
Yeah.
you think?
Interesting. Well, I was just thinking that it ties in well with feedback. So, um, for example, I've been giving a C1 course for English teachers. And in order to give them feedback about speaking, about writing, um, I think it's nice to point out what kind of language they're using for the C1 exam, for example. So, if they're using words like good and big, they should be using words like enormous or, much more advanced words. And then, for example, like in the C1 exam, you have a whole criteria of what the examiner is looking for in both speaking, writing, well, everything. But we need to know that criteria. So the teacher needs to be assessment literate, right? To know what the exam is asking for. And so I think giving feedback after somebody has written a piece of writing or sent you a speaking on WhatsApp, and giving them feedback in terms of what they're doing really well, how to improve, pronunciation in speaking, for example. Are they using discourse markers in writing? Are they being coherent? Are they being organized in the writing, for example, even in the speaking? So, yeah, I think it's to do with that. What do you think?
Okay. Fill me in, Vinicius and Jane. I left and
Okay.
came back in.
You
And
went on a little holiday.
everybody
I
can
went
call
on a
me Vinny,
holiday
right?
and came back.
You say Vinicius. I'm actually
Vinny,
I
Vinny,
start
sorry,
looking
Vinny.
for the Vinicius. I'm like, where is this Vinicius? It's
Which
like
one?
there.
Vinny,
It's
Vinny.
definitely not my identity. But anyway, no, I agree
Sorry.
with Jane. I think that assessment and feedback are intertwined. They're very much connected. And then going back to the statement that Bruna posed to us, because Bruna she lifted one of the statements from the chat, Stefan.
Mm,
Assessment is a natural skill that all good teachers have, and she asked us whether we agree with it or not.
mm,
And I think it's a very interesting, very thought-provoking statement, because the first thing that crosses my mind is how do you assess good teachers? So
good
how do you
teacher.
know if the teacher is good or not? There is a lot of debate as well regarding
That's
what good
right.
teaching really is. And then if you come to think of it, like if you assume that a teacher is good, then yes, they need to know about assessment. But then I don't think it's necessarily a natural skill. That's the one thing that I might disagree with the statement a little bit. I think it's actually a competence that you develop. It's something that you learn, because feedback. There are people who can spontaneously give good feedback, connecting with Jane's point. But giving good feedback is a complex thing. I mean, when it comes to the feedback on the learning process as a whole, because you have feedback on language, you have feedback on the learning strategies, you have feedback on a range of other competencies and skills that a student needs to display. So I'm not so sure I agree with the statement. I think that good teachers, they need to know about assessment,
That's right.
and they need to know about how assessment and feedback come together, and the power that these skills might bring into the lesson. But I don't think it's so natural. I think it is something that you need to study for, need
Mm.
to have formal knowledge about. I don't know if you agree with me, Stefan.
No, no, no. I would go down that road as well. I might even respond, the typical way our students might when they ask them a question. It depends, but not necessarily, right? Because again, naturally, you can't say that we are born like we. We're not. I don't think we're born. Not everybody's a born teacher necessarily. The same way they can say we're all born teachers. But you could be born, you could have that kind of maybe talent, but you still need to work on it, even if you have that natural talent. You still need to kind of
Mm.
develop it, hone it in, develop those skills to the point where you know what you're doing. Because
Mhm.
sometimes you might be good at something, but you don't realize you're doing it very well, or you don't know what you're doing. 'Cause a lot of times, especially I think it happened to all of us here, when we started teaching, we would do things, and then when we started maybe read about it in the books, and we said, that's what I was doing. Or realize, oh my God, I did it all wrong. I'm so sorry. You got to go back and apologize to your students because now you realize you were doing it wrong. But you
Yeah.
thought you were doing the right thing because you had the right intentions. You see,
Sounds
so
very familiar.
Yeah.
exactly. You
There's
think
always a big learning curve, right?
is it? So
Yeah.
without this knowledge, you need to develop that. You need to work on it. It's a skill, but it's not
Mhm.
something that happens naturally. Teachers, and maybe we assume that as well. That as a teacher, you have to know you know how to assess. You know how to give feedback. You know what you have to do, right? So things
Mhm.
that we overlook, and maybe we need to go a little closer into it and dive in a little bit more, explore that, understand that yes, it has to be really practiced. Even experienced teachers like us, sometimes you have to learn how to give feedback because you're not just delivering a message. You have to remember who is on the other side. Am I
Yeah.
getting my message across? Right? Assessment and feedback are forms of communication. I'm saying something to that student, and if my student doesn't understand me, I'm not saying anything.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's part of assessment as well, knowing the tools I have, knowing how I'm going to be able to explain that to the student, right? So that we
Mhm.
go back to what Jane said. If students are C1 and they're doing an exam, they have to know that they have to do these certain things to perform in the exam. So it's speaking as performance as opposed to speaking as transaction or speaking as interaction or speaking for just everyday communication, so that
Yeah.
they need to know that in that case, they can't just say good, but they have to probably say better. They can't just say big as to say huge, or you said, or ginormous, as I learned today. I was reading in text in Twitter, somebody said it's a ginormous experience. I was like, oh, gigantic and enormous becomes ginormous. Okay, fine.
That's
So
That's
right.
intense.
that's intense, right? Ginormous.
Very.
So imagine telling a student that that was a ginormous performance. So
But I agree with
you
you,
have to
Stefan.
know.
It
Yeah.
has to do with communication, doesn't it? And communication has to do with active listening.
Yes.
So you really listen, and you need to know your students, and you really listen to what they're saying, take it on board, respond appropriately. I think
Hmm.
it has to do with that.
Yeah, they
and
have to know
and
what
the
they're
same
doing.
and the
They have to
same
know what it is
person
that they're doing. Sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. The same person mentioned something that I love. They said you can't give feedback if you don't assess,
Mm.
and this is very important. I think that a lot of teachers might resist assessment because sometimes we believe, and that's what Gracieli mentioned. Sometimes we believe that assessment might be a synonym for fear, and I think that in many
Mm.
contexts it still is. So I think that
Mhm.
sometimes teachers resent it, and as the other person said, I think it's KLM 363.
Yeah.
As they mentioned, you can't really give feedback if you're not assessing, right? An assessment is a positive thing. It is necessary. It's part of what we do all the time. And as you were just mentioning before, it's everything that we do when we listen attentively and consciously to students' production and to what they are doing and what they are saying.
Hmm.
And I'd like to pose a question to the two of you because Juliana asked us to talk a little bit about kinds of assessment. And since we're talking about formal and informal assessment, and
Right.
we also talked about tests, right?
Hmm.
And how we usually think about tests as the only possibility for assessment. Would you mind sharing with us some other assessment opportunities or assessment tools or assessment techniques, strategies that you've used already just to help? I think it's Juliana. Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think. Go ahead, Jane. Go ahead.
No, okay.
All right.
I think there's I think there's some exciting things going on around the world actually. So there's project-based learning, so design thinking, because we need people who have skills, 21st century skills, right? So who know how to work together in a team, collaboration. I was watching a video about a TED talk yesterday about a Dutch woman, a Dutch teacher, and she gave her students a task which was to build a wooden toy. And then she had various groups going on. So what one of them was designing the toy, another one was thinking about the colors, another one about the price, another one about the campaign, how they're going to sell it. So there's very practical ideas, yeah.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
also there is lots of debate going on, I think, about alternative types of assessment. So, for example, perhaps multiple choice questions can be answered in pairs. or a student could take his or her notes into the exam with them and
Open
consult
book.
their notes, yeah,
Mm. Hmm.
while they're doing the exam. What
Yeah.
do you think about that,
No,
guys?
definitely. Adding to what you said about project based, you could go with the portfolios,
Yeah.
where students create their own portfolios over the course of it. So that's one way of doing that, where they maybe put in blog posts or text, articles that they have written, or notes they've taken down, and added it into a folder, which shows the learning process, which shows what they have learned over that period of time. There's journaling, which is not necessarily a tool in itself, but if you get students to just, after they've done an activity, you ask them a question and they talk about that. You talk about testing in pairs or in groups. There's the think, pair, and share technique, where you get them to think about something related to the topic they just studied. Okay, go back now, talk to your partner about it, and share what you have come up with. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
form of assessment as well. Um, the alternatives, I think a nice way is also working with the audience. Since we have so much available to us nowadays with social media, getting students to present or talk to external audiences, sharing what they produce to people in, other teachers, other school, other classes, other groups. Sometimes maybe getting a friend of yours to come and comment on their work, right? I do that with my teachers or students, where I get some people I know from Twitter or from other social media to comment on their presentations. So it's not from a language based, let's say, perspective. It's on content. So the person is really commenting on what they felt when they read that piece of work. They're really interacting with the content, and it gives them a different perspective. It's like, oh, they're not just focusing on language. So there are things that you can do like that. There
Mm-hmm.
are, maybe reflective videos where you could get them to record a quick video to show them what they have talked about, what they have learned, evidence of learning. So show me what you can do, show me what you
Mm-hmm.
have learned, from those kinds of opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely perfect ideas. I would add. I mean, Stefan kind of like mentioned this, but oral presentations, recorded presentations, assessing students through the process of a project, and not just the final product of a project, is also
Mhm.
something that is very interesting and very important. And I just like to reinforce portfolios. I'm a big fan of portfolios,
Yeah.
but I think that the key point here, especially when it comes to how students feel about assessment and about testing, is and this is kind of like a question I think Karin asked, how
Mhm.
can we minimize the negative washback, as we say, right? The term
Yes.
in assessment, this impact, this negative feeling that students and teachers might get because of the assessment that is being implemented. One way to minimize this negative feeling is to give students plenty of opportunities to show what they can do and create an environment of success. If you have one specific day and the test starts at 2 o'clock and students are being monitored and they cannot check their notes and they have to do it individually, and you are there, wearing sunglasses. I used to have a teacher who'd wear sunglasses because he didn't want anybody to know who he was monitoring. So there was this tense environment all the time. This is far from ideal because you're not really allowing students to show what they can do. You are rather creating such a stressful situation that will demand other competencies and not necessarily their communication skills or their communicative competence, or they might not be able to show you how much they've developed because they are under so much stress. So one of the best ways to minimize the negative impact of assessment is to give students a lot of opportunities to show what they can do, and opportunities that are stress free, that are more
Mhm.
natural, more authentic, more realistic. Students need to understand that assessment is a friend of theirs, and it's not supposed to be this stressful moment in which I'm testing you and you are either a pass or a fail.
That's
They
all.
should not feel that their whole potential and their whole identity would be determined by that specific moment. This is really negative in education, and we pay very high prices because we've been doing this for so long. We have our whole educational system completely dedicated to vestibular and Enem, which is this one moment that kind of like defines your life. And as a consequence, we miss out a whole bunch of opportunities to help students develop cooperation, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, because they are learning things by heart and memorizing a whole bunch of things that they will never use in their lives just because of that one stressful day.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that I wanted to say today.
No,
Yeah, I
very good,
completely
very good.
agree with you.
Perfect, perfect. And it again, I think it ties in with a question that was posted here about is there bad assessment? They're not necessarily bad assessment. I don't know if we could use this word bad assessment, but it's not adequate or not well suited to the students, to the context, or it's not meeting the goals that is supposed to fit in the same, at that point. While you were talking, also something that also occurred to me as well, where you could get students to choose things is you could give them several opportunities to work on this, and then they could choose out of these several opportunities. Let's say they had 7 different tasks, and they could do whatever they and they could the 4 best. Let's say the 4 best. They would choose the 4 best, and that would be submitted as part of their assessment. I'm just using this because if we were following the Olympics, lots of these sports, like skating, for example, they have 7 attempts, and the 3 worst grades or 3 worst scores are eliminated automatically. So it gives them a chance to, okay, I have 7 chances, I can do this, and I can, so you give them opportunity to maybe not just draw, write, record a video, use other platforms, define how they want to do it as well. It reminded me of something I did recently with some students, where I told them, okay, you guys have, these are the topics. You can use different platforms to create what you're going to create. The stories are here, but I want you can use, Minecraft, this, you can draw an infographic, whatever. And they came up with all kinds of stuff. Some of them did videos, some of them did, podcasts, and they were there. It was assessment. So if it's possible, we don't know, because sometimes teachers may not have that liberty to give opportunity. But if you can, I think you can give this, and not just at advanced level, at simple levels as well. What, A1, A2, it doesn't matter. You can give them. You just have to adapt the text, and whatever they need to do. If it's A1, A2, okay, maybe a simpler task, but make it more task based so that they can show you what they're able to produce. And then base it on criteria there.
Interesting ideas. And I'd just like to pick up on something that Vinny said about the stress part. I'll let you into a little secret. I don't go very well with multiple choice questions as a learner. So I'm actually doing a postgraduate course in Brazil at the moment, and it's assessed by multiple choice questions. And you watch videos and you read, and that's fine. But when it comes to the multiple choice, I look at it and I see those 4 options, and I just get this block in my head. And last week I did the test, the same test 5 times. Can you believe it? And in the end, it was a process of elimination. So multiple choice doesn't suit everyone.
That's a good point, Jane. Because sometimes people, it's great because you mentioned that. Sorry for interrupting, but sometimes we talk about Kahoot, for example. Everybody's in school using Kahoot, right? And there's some students that I had 2 students who told me this. I'm terrible at multiple choice, and this whole thing about Kahoot freaks me out because I have to look at the colors and the time is there, and But you think that it's so wonderful and everybody loves these things, but again, it might not meet the needs or might not help the student. Actually, the student might feel much more stressed in that kind of environment. So it's interesting to know that as well.
And stress comes out in different ways, right? Like you start sweating, or your stomach is churning, or all sorts of things. And we don't want our students to go through that, right? We want to humanize it and make it much more enjoyable, let's say.
If you allow me, I'd like to expand on multiple choices a little bit more, because I'm on a one-man journey against multiple choices. Because I think that
you're not alone.
No, you're not alone. The 3 of us here.
Let's gang up against multiple choices. Because as much as I can understand the practicality in multiple choices,
Of
and again,
course.
this is another term in assessment, right? Assessment needs to be practical.
Mhm.
If you have 300 students, for example, you may not be able to mark 300 compositions on a weekly basis because you want to give them a lot of opportunities to show you how much they've developed and how much they can do. So sometimes we need to go for something that is a little bit more objective and, as we say, a little more reliable in the sense that whoever corrects that piece of work will come to the same conclusion, right? One of the features of multiple choice is that it's highly reliable. But as we
Mm.
know in the theory of assessment, there is a natural tension between reliability and validity. And validity is really assessing what you want to assess. And one of my issues with multiple choices is that you don't go out in the real world selecting four choices. You don't walk into a shop and then the shop assistant asks you four questions and you have to choose the best one, right?
With a
Or
timer, with a timer.
exactly in writing, right?
Yeah.
They don't give you a piece of paper and say, okay, answer my question, choose one of these four. So it is not realistic. So it kind of like narrows the assessment down to that one specific point that you chose to focus on. And communication is much broader, much broader than that. Communication is about flexibility, is
Mhm.
about expressing your opinions even if you don't remember one specific word. Is about having the freedom to choose a different verb tense because you don't feel confident using that particular verb tense and still convey meaning. And in multiple choices, we are testing what we want to test and not necessarily what students can do. So I've I took it as one of the missions in my assessment journey to spread not I don't want to ditch multiple choices altogether, but I do want us to be more conscious when we're using multiple choices. I think that sometimes, especially teachers who might start writing their own tests, who might do this just from experience without any kind of formal education regarding or assessment literacy per se, they might just go for multiple choices because that's kind of like simple, it's familiar, it's what is out there quite a lot, and they
Mhm.
choose multiple choices because it's just more practical. But
Practical.
I think we need to bear in mind that there is a huge limitation with multiple choices and that it's not as valid as it needs to be, right? There are a lot of people who look at their results, and I'm sure Jane is probably one of them. I'm sorry to use you as an example, Jane, but since you opened
Go
your heart
ahead.
to us,
I did.
I'm
Too
pretty sure
late.
Jane is an
Too late
example.
now.
She might look at her result from a multiple choice test and say, this doesn't really represent me. I can do much better than this. As there are people who will look at that and say, yes, I didn't know anything, but I was really lucky and I could cheat. Or so
Mm.
multiple choice activities, they allow us for cheating. They allow us to memorize. They encourage us to memorize things, but they also give us opportunities to guess and that's not valid. That's not what you're
Mhm.
truly assessing, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, it
Mhm.
works on. It gives you strategies that are to a certain extent valid in life because sometimes the students work by elimination. Sometimes they work on predictability as well because sometimes when we create these multiple choice tests, we tend to always put the same answers, the same sequence. So students know that and they understand what's coming next. Right? I've had that experience in the beginning when I started creating those, and students would tell me, "Oh, I know that you always put it like this, or you always, they understand and they know what to expect from you." So
Mhm.
it becomes predictable, and you're not
Mhm.
testing it alone. You're just working with just basically elimination, working by elimination, but it's not showing what they can actually do. So if you
Mhm.
have multiple choice tests, you can let's say complement it with other types of assessment. That would be wonderful. In an ideal world, of course, I think this is the best thing. If you can have other ways of doing the same thing, because that doesn't tell us a lot about the student, how good they are at that particular skill or content that they were just supposed to study and so on. So there's a lot that's going on there. Very, very good point.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I
And
agree.
there was a point here, and I'd like to, since we are
Yeah.
in this debate of
Yes, yes.
reliability, validity, multiple choice, there is a point here that I feel is very much connected to it. I can't find it now, but it was somebody who mentioned proficient. Oh, it was Karina. She
Mm.
mentioned that in order to get a proficiency certification, however, we have to go through this kind of test, right?
Mhm.
And
Correct.
Mhm.
yes, many international certificates they have multiple choices, for example. But Karina, I do want to emphasize how, and that's what Stefan just mentioned. That's why I thought it was an important link. How these international exams they compensate for the multiple choice. So I don't know if anybody here is. I'm pretty sure Jane and Stefan will remember the old TOEFL.
Mhm.
I don't know if everybody watching us will have this memory. If there is anyone out there who's been teaching for more than 20 years, maybe. Um, Not me. I read it in a book, right? I
Yeah,
Of
never had to
course
do
not.
that. But I used to love preparing students for the old TOEFL, the paper-based TOEFL. It was all multiple
yes.
choice, and it was for me as a language teacher. It was so much fun because I had to just like brainwash my students and focus on passive voice. So let's do passive voice. Was there a context? No. Did I
No.
care if my students had to use the passive voice in real life? No. It was all
No.
about memorizing the rule and doing a whole bunch of exercises and talking about the little exceptions. It was so much
Mhm.
fun, you know. And then the conditionals. It was fun because I was doing it, because my students hated it. And at the end of the day, they would actually get good scores, but they were not able to speak. They were not,
Right.
so the test started losing validity, right? And
Mhm.
I think that when we think about the current proficiency certificates that we have, they are much more holistic. So in a way, Karin, I agree with you. These international proficiency certificates, uh, they kind of like bring some multiple choices and more limited alternatives, but they have changed quite a lot. And you
Mm.
have speaking components and writing components that are not limited like multiple choices, for example. They
Mhm.
allow students to display what they know, and they give students the opportunity to really show off, right? And
Mhm.
have freedom in the way they communicate. So they need to be better prepared for anything and not just specific discrete items. Did
Yeah.
I make sense?
Total
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
It
So
makes a lot of
it's
sense.
much
Mhm.
more
Right.
integrated now, isn't it? Like with the
Yeah, yeah.
TOEFL, you might read something and then have to speak, or read
Mm-hmm.
something and write. And many of the exams reflect that nowadays. I was trying to remember how the proficiency was, 20 years ago, the CPE from the Cambridge assessment. And it was very different. You just used to have one candidate. Now you have two candidates because they can interact with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So interaction is a major part, isn't it, of communication?
Well, yeah,
And
because that's what we're after, right? We want
yeah,
communication. And this is the students have to be able to use not just the structures by themselves, but to be able to put it into everyday communication, performing certain tasks, being able to do things. And that's what we want students to feel that, okay, yes, I can really, and not just moving away from the I can sentences, the can do statements, but
yeah,
students really feel, yes, I am able to do this. If I'm in a specific context, I have to interact with people online, I can do that. I don't need necessarily to, call up my teacher in the middle of the night to ask a question about this, the question that was sent to me. I can deal with it. So this is basically the whole point. I think we have to give students opportunity for what they call evidence of learning.
hmm
Evidence of learning. And sometimes, even if possible, again, you can ask students, okay, if you could create the test for yourself, or show me something that you would want me, you want to show that you can do, not necessarily something from the book, but let's design something, create something that you love doing, and show me how you can present that. It's something out of the classroom, because then you get really to see what the student is capable of, what they are driven by, their
mm,
motivations, their passions, their interests, and so on. And that can be open door actually to how you can really get them to work much more on their skills. Say, so there's a lot I think that we can explore there, um,
hmm hmm
and there's so much. We think of these certification, yes, and we can even think, if you go back to the NA and vestibular and so on, they have to perform. They have to do certain things that are structured and expected to do. So that a lot of times students ask us, well, just why do we have to do all of this? Because, or why do you want me to talk about creative thinking or critical thinking if I don't have to use this in the test? I just have to memorize. So this is, again, that's why I think this one man journey that Vinny was talking about, we have to make it a much bigger journey. Everybody has to be involved to kind of change these the outlook of what assessment is. It shouldn't be it shouldn't be a sentence to judge or to say what people are, but it's that moment. It could be that moment, but it also reflects a process. See, so there's lots of things
Yeah.
going on there that we have to consider.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and I can see on the chat that Mabel, I think, said the assessment should be based on real life situations that will be used in your day to day and at work. Do you agree?
Yeah, whenever possible, of course. It has to be.
Absolutely.
It
That's
has
the
to be relevant.
validity, right? That's the validity. It's uh, uh, I know Bruna popped up and just let me
Here
just
comes
finish this
Bruna.
sentence.
Oh
One
God.
sentence. But that's the whole point of validity. I mean, the more aligned, the more realistic and real the activity, the task, the exercise is, the more valid the assessment is. Because what's the whole point, right? We want students to succeed. We want them to be able to do well in real life. So if the assessment doesn't mirror real life, it's hard for us to say that they will be prepared. For me, the most valid assessment would be something like, you finish a unit on going shopping, and then when you finish the unit, you take your students shopping and they have to buy something in English, and then you assess if they can do it or not. For me, that would be the most valid assessment. It's subjective, of course. It's not very reliable, as we mentioned before, right? There is this issue of reliability and validity, but it's totally valid, because then you see if the work you did was really effective or not in real life, which theoretically speaking should be your aim. Sorry, Bruno.
No, definitely. Let me add on to it before Bruno comes in as well, because it has to do with that, as you
I
said,
am
real life.
sorry. I didn't want to interrupt you guys.
No, no, that's all right.
No, but it was so nice to listen to
Uh-huh.
all of the things. When you were talking about, for example, using real life and asking the students if they, what they would like to do, something they want to create, or there is a question here. A lot of people are sending me questions here, guys, but
Oh, no, there are many
how can,
questions.
yes, many questions. How can teachers help students become more autonomous? I think I'd like to listen to you talking about it, because it's really nice to
Mhm,
know what you think.
mhm. No,
Yeah, I
autonomy.
think, but
Go
sorry,
ahead, go
Stefan.
ahead. No, go ahead.
I think by sometimes challenging the students. For example, sometimes you have students that say, "Como que é maçã de novo? Como que é mesa de novo?" And they're asking you many times because they're relying on you. But if they see you more as a facilitator and you challenge them, so you say something like, "Well, remember." So it's apple, but for example, before giving the word, you could say, well, it begins with A, it ends in E. Do you remember?
Mhm.
Challenging them, or even with concept questions. So I think challenging them is a good way.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, definitely. We could start with a challenge. And it has become more and more important because of online learning, which a lot of students have migrated. We have had to migrate to online, the context, and students were not used to that before. I think there was a question that went back about helping students online, assessing students online as well. So it's connected to that. It's connected to what Kim just put there about student-centered learning, where students have to be able to depend for themselves.
Yeah.
I was talking about, I'm working on corpus linguistics, for example. So I use a lot of corpus-based tools, right? And not just for my research or for my stuff to prepare, because we sometimes use these corpus tools to find examples to present in the classroom. But what I do sometimes is get students to actually use these tools for themselves. So that, okay, you've come across a word. How do you know this word works? How can you find it? Let's go in. Let's use tools like word reference. Let's use online dictionaries. Help them to do things for themselves, And when they come across new words, when they come across something that doesn't make sense to them, or it's hard for them to kind of understand it, work with context, work with contextual clues that they can use out of the classroom. So that whenever you teach them these things, hey, I don't want you to just use this in the classroom, but next time you do this, I want you to do this when you read a newspaper. You come across a new word, you're going to circle it, try and find the meaning, look at the context, go read it, go further down, see if you can find the definition. What do you expect from it? Look at the extra linguistic clues and so on and so on. So the more we can give them these tools, not just use them for us to teach, but also show them that they can use these. So I use what one site called Skell, which is Sketch Engine Language Learning, and I put students to type in a word and look for the examples. So they get tons of examples with that word in the sentence. Then they found synonyms, and then they look at how it goes together. They see all the combinations of that particular word. And I show them, okay, look at how the language works. What do you see? What do you notice? Try to ask them questions and then take notes of that. Create your own flashcards. I always tell them when I was learning Portuguese way back. I mean, I think you were here at 27. I've been here for 24 years. But when I started learning Portuguese, I kept a notebook with English and Portuguese. And one side I wrote in Portuguese in blue, I think, and then the other side I wrote in English in red. And every weekend on Sunday, this was my Sunday ritual, I would cover the English words and then test myself. Yeah. So I tell them, do these things, create little things to help you learn for yourself, because you are learning not for me, but for you. See, so these little strategies, and now we have the tools for that. That can make things a little much easier. I think so. Those are things we can do to help work with this idea of autonomy. It's self-directed. Understand that they have to guide it. Yeah, they know what they're going for. Going back to what you said as the facilitator, we have to facilitate. Yeah, we're not going to be there spoon feeding. And the difference between the spoon feed and the scaffolding. So I think Vinny can talk about the scaffolding. I'll leave that cue for him to talk
Now,
about this.
if I may, I want to go back to the tools because
Oh yeah, go for that.
as you were talking about the tools and the resources,
Yeah.
something just crossed my mind, which is this fascinating fact that we encourage students to use the tools. We tell them how to look things up in dictionaries and apps or the other all the websites that they can resort to. But then when we give them a piece of paper and a pencil, and they have to write a composition without any kind of resource. I remember when I implemented in a school that I used to direct, I implemented the writing component of everyone's assessment could be used with resources. The students could check. They could. There was the possibility of consultation, and teachers, ironically, teachers were really upset because they were like, "But this is not fair." And then I was thinking, well, we really need to work on assessment, right? Because what is fair assessment? Isn't fair assessment checking how students will perform in real life? And when do we in real life have to write something in a closed room being monitored by somebody with a specific time limit without any kind of resources? Only in exam conditions. And how many exams like this do we sit in our life, as opposed to the emails that we write or the articles that you may write or all the other pieces, notes that we may write? There are so many other genres in which we resort to things and we use everything that we know. So I find it very ironic that as teachers, we provide students with all these tools and we want to help them develop learner autonomy, and we want them to be able to use these resources. But when it comes to assessment, there are still many contexts that will assess students in artificial conditions, and as opposed to allowing them to do what they would do in real life. I mean, if you need 3 hours to write an email, I mean, that's okay. That's what you're going to do in your real life. If you know how to look things up in a dictionary, if you know how to make good use of these resources and they communicate in real life what you want to communicate, that's what I want to know. That's what I need to know. We still live very much in a world of make believe. I need to pretend that you are doing will convince me. I don't really care what you're going to do in your real life. And it should be the opposite. We should be
Mm.
giving students the chance to show us what they do in real life, so that we can then assess their
Mhm.
strengths and their weaknesses and the areas that they need to focus on, right?
Good
Yeah,
point. Good point.
maybe we need to practice critical thinking a bit more and
As
discuss,
well.
why we're doing certain things.
Hmm.
Because there is sometimes teachers rely on how their assessment was when they were students, for example, and you know maybe not think so much about how it could be done differently. So discussion groups are really important, I think, talking
Oh
about
yeah,
these things.
like what we're
Mm.
doing here, right? And I think what
Yeah,
you said as
exactly.
well. No, that's it goes into that, and going into what Vinny just said there about the types of tools that students use to write it sometimes, and maybe we end up maybe conveying that idea, and some, at least I've had that experience with students. See, they feel frustrated if they have to resort to materials. So I have
Mm.
students who I have to write an email, and I had to check the dictionaries, but that's not a problem. Why do you see that as a problem? Because probably we tell them, we not openly or directly, but by the way we assess things in the classroom, it has given this impression that if you have to use a dictionary, if you have to consult Google Translate or whatever, then you are defeating, or you're not learning, you're not making progress. But rather, we should be giving them strategies to use these things. So as I
Mhm.
mentioned, word reference or any other online dictionary, Lingui or whatever works for them, or whatever they have available, but teach them how to use it. So
Mhm.
how are you going to use that when you're going to write your email? How are you going to use
Mhm.
that when you're going to write a tweet? Going back to one of the questions asked about, the assessment for A1, A2 learners really, really simple? Well, simple might be simple for us, but for the student, it might be for them the world. So we have to remember that too. It's simple because they just have to write 100 words. But if you tell a student to write 100 words at the beginning level, is for him, it's like, oh my God, it's a thesis, right?
Mhm.
So you have to
It
know
needs to be valid, right? It
it,
needs to be consistent with what
it
the
needs to be
students
consistent.
learned.
Mhm.
Exactly. It has to
Of
be consistent. So you can't just say, well, oh God, it's too simple. What is that? If it's going to be valid for the student, where the student uses a lot of social media, interacts with people on social media all the time, and the fact that they can get a comment or hear somebody reply to their tweet, it means the world to them. And when students, the first time I asked them to post something on Twitter, and somebody actually replied, they said, they replied, oh my God. And they confessed
That's
that
real life.
yes. And they said, but there were mistakes in my tweet. I said, but did anybody correct your mistakes? I asked them that. No. There you go. So yes, we're going to work on these mistakes eventually. But what was your goal? Achieve communication, interact, get information from that person, talk with somebody, human interaction. That's what it's all about.
Mhm.
So you
Mhm.
were achieving your goals. Yeah. So that's the assessment you have to make of your learning. So it's not
Mhm.
going in, definitely. You know.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
So
I just like to go back to the resources, because this is a topic that is very dear to me, and I just want to illustrate, because if somebody tells you, and as I've heard, but Vinny, if students can check their notes and if students can use other resources when they are doing it, how will I know what they can really do? And then my answer always is, if you think that by using other resources this might prevent you from knowing what they can do, then the problem is your assessment, is not the resources. Because
damn.
you need to redesign your assessment. You need to create an assessment that will be so authentic and so original and so real that by using the resources, the students will then show you what they can do, not only in terms of language skills but also in terms of study skills. If they can
Mhm.
use these resources consciously and make good use of these resources to become better communicators, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what we want students to achieve. So if there is a problem there, the problem is not the students or the resources. The problem is really the assessment. Good assessment, in my opinion, should be uncheatable, right? If that word even exists. Um,
Just
but
create it.
but if students can cheat, if they can simply copy from each other, that means that their voice is not there. That means that there is a problem with the assessment. You are assessing something that can be copied, and you need
Mhm.
to design assessment that needs to be original, because then it's more real life.
Mhm.
Mhm.
and it doesn't have to be, as you said. We can sense when students are not, let's say, using what they're capable of, or you can see that they've copied and pasted it. You can tell that, because if you see what what they're able to produce in the classroom with you in that context, then you ask them to produce something out of the classroom. It's just comparing. It's like, whoa, 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 this sounds really, really good. Never seen it perform like that. So, and it's not a matter of punishing as well. It's not a matter of, okay, now I have to, put in a one big fat zero there because copy and paste. But it's going back to the idea of study skills. What does it mean when I access something? So, teaching them how to make notes, teaching them how to use mind maps, teaching them how to represent their learning, not just, copy, underline lots of stuff, but being able to summarize, summarizing content. That's also as
And
important to show what they're learning.
teaching them not to cheat, because
Teaching them
that's
not
what
to,
education is all about, right?
exactly.
Because if a student copies something from the internet, that's a crime. That they are
Yes.
that's copyright
Plagiarism.
infringement. It's plagiarism.
Plagiarism. So they face a
We
risk.
need to educate students. We're not there as
Exactly.
simple language technicians. We're not there to simply get students to memorize 87 words and learn 5 verb tenses. We are there
Mhm.
to help them become effective communicators and hopefully better human beings. So if we don't point it out, and I've seen teachers who are so afraid of the conflict and so afraid of the confrontation that they don't really bring it up. It's part of assessment. We are assessing individuals in their whole learning process. It's not just the words they've memorized or their ability to use the present perfect.
Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
I agree. And you said about taking notes, Stefan.
Mhm.
If they get at school, if they're listening to their teacher, they should be taking notes. At university, they should be taking notes. It's a life skill, right?
That's right. Note taking. In the TOEFL, you mentioned the TOEFL, right? One of the skills in TOEFL, the IBT, IBT TOEFL, is note taking. You have to know how to
Yeah,
take notes. This is what
that's
we
right.
need to do all the time.
The
It's not
IELTS
just
as well.
copying all, but knowing how to extract information, putting it into your own words. The idea of paraphrasing. So this is a skill we have to teach them. Yeah. So if we go back to the idea of reported speech, where one of the things that we always kind of abhor in the classroom, how to teach reported speech. There you have it, the chance to work on. This is what I read and this is what I understood. It's reporting. You are getting them to paraphrase. This is what the author said, and this is what, according to so and so. You're teaching them how to make citations. You're teaching them how to create ideas based on knowledge, because there's nothing new under the sun, but we have to be able to take it from our perspective, put it in our own words, give it our own view, our own take. That's the idea.
And if you allow me to be a little more controversial, Stefan,
Go ahead, bro.
I would actually go back and pose the question: why do we need to teach students the reported speech? We need to teach students how to report things. There was
Exactly.
this I think it was Jeremy Harmer who said there was this it was Jeremy Harmer. There was this interesting talk by Jeremy in which he said we spend I don't know how many lessons teaching students the future perfect continuous, and the occurrence of the future perfect continuous in real life is like 0.03%. And then
Exactly.
students get all stressed out because the future perfect continuous and we're there having fun because it's complex language and they have to use the future continuous for that specific occasion. If one day they want to talk about what they will have been doing in whatever, and at the end of the day, if we go from from linguistic competence alone to full communicative competence, we start challenging these beliefs that students have to learn this and this discrete item, and we start assessing students in terms of what they can really do, and not what they can memorize or repeat just like parrots without necessarily generating meaning or a message, right?
Yeah. No, no.
Yeah. I think
Perfect.
like
Perfect.
if I went back to my parents' house, I'm from a small village in the West Country of the UK, and there are a lot of farmers around, and we have our own dialect there. Very few people use the third conditional, exactly.
The who?
and
The what? The third what?
and we have a lot of, when I go back, I'm constantly learning new phrasal verbs that have just come out, and then I have to
Yeah,
kind of
great.
tune in and see what's happening, see how to use them, so That's real language, isn't it?
Yeah, as you said, and it's not just as I think what Victor's saying here. We need to teach our students how to gossip. Gossiping is not just, oh, this is she said, but the different ways of doing that. The whole thing about storytelling techniques, the whole thing about getting the and picking up what Vinny was saying about meaning. It's about meaning. What am I trying to say? Is that what I am getting across? What message am I conveying there? So that yeah, we want them to teach this, and maybe it's part of our vanity as teachers. Oh yeah, they have to learn future perfect continuous. They have to learn these phrasal verbs because I'm teaching it. And again, we talk about
Mm.
student-centered learning, but we do things in a way that students keep depending on us anyway, because we have to teach them these language structures, or we force them into these language boxes: linguistic competent, linguistic competent, linguistic competent. That's all you got to focus on. But we tell them no. Sometimes our discourse or what we actually are saying is contradictory, because we are focusing on one thing, but we tell them no, you got to do more, or you have to be able to communicate. But at the same time, we are not doing that when we say, okay, our lesson today is on past continuous. Like, what? The lessons on past continuous. So the assessment, being able to assess them on that. When we do, if we're going to create assessment, it shouldn't be on, oh, it has to include 10 questions on the present perfect, 5 questions on past continuous, and 5 on the future continuous. No, it has to be on being able to get messages across, talk about situations past, present, things that happen, life experiences, and so on and so forth. So much more functionally based, much more competence, as you mentioned, the idea of communicative competence, sociolinguistic competence, because not just the language, but understanding the cultural aspects when we communicate to each other, right? What's expected, what's not expected, right? We say get students to write their own assessments. Yes, I love doing that with my students, where they create. And it sometimes become a bit of a competition where they try to create the hardest questions. But I tell them it's not just that. It's about the learning. So don't just come up with questions that nobody would ask anyway. But
Mm.
think of what you want to learn in the end. It's always about that. If you have that idea very clear to students about the objective of assessment, what they're going to do with that at the end, then you in this case do what we call the backward planning. Because if my goal is very clear, students goals, they know what they have to do, we can work backwards from there and understand how we can plan, how we can really assess, because we want students to get to that point, using visual literacy, visual learning, for example. So if I show them, this is what I want you to be able to do, I show them a quick video of people interacting, people gossiping on a TV show, and they would teach, I will never be able to do that. Of course you can. With the language you have, you're not going to be imitating them, but you're going to be able to perform that. You're going to perform this. This is what we are aiming for at the end. So that this is your assessment, being able to gossip in the language. You see? It's a quick example.
Mm-hmm.
And going back a little bit to the importance of being assessment literate for teachers, kind of like to wrap this up. I mean, the whole point of specific verb tenses, discrete items being tested rather than competence and
Mhm.
what students can do. I think this only comes to show how important it is for teachers to be assessment literate, because in the way I see it, we tend to focus on these discrete items because it's easier for us to measure. And then if we don't really understand what assessment is about, it's much more comfortable for us to say that we are assessing learners when we check the past continuous is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the preposition is appropriate. They chose the correct phrasal verb, because this is very concrete. This is
Exactly.
much more comfortable. Assessing students holistically and considering their ability to communicate effectively, considering their discourse management, the way they use phonological features, the range that they have when choosing lexis and grammar, how well they achieve the task. These are much more subjective and complex subjects, and assessment needs to be subjective. It can't be simplified. We need to stop trying to simplify the complex. There are
Mhm.
things that are complex. They are complicated, they're difficult. You need to study them, you need to know what you're doing. But we have this urge to try and simplify things. So, oh no, it's very easy to write a test. You just copy some exercises from the book, you change the beach. Instead of the beach, you write the club. Instead of John, you write Mary. And then
Mm-hmm.
you replace some of the people in some of the places with the same exercises from the book, and there you go. You know how well your students are doing. And
Mm-hmm.
assessment is much, much more than this. And I think that we need to, as teachers, we need to sit down and have a serious conversation about what we are assessing and how we are assessing our learners, so that we don't convey the message that learning a language is simply memorizing the present perfect continuous or a list of phrasal verbs. There is much more to being a good communicator and being a proficient speaker of a language than what a multiple choice test can offer.
Yeah, and it all goes back to communication, actually, doesn't it? Boils down to communication,
Yes.
because it's people speaking. They should be understood, and then you would have effective communication going on, right? So, if I went to the northeast of Brazil, I don't know if I would be able to be understood or understand what they're saying, because they have a different
Sometimes.
accent there.
Yeah, exactly.
Or if a student went to my parents' house, how would that be? So, there are lots of different settings, aren't there?
No, definitely. I
If
and
you,
when you
if
would no, when you talked about that and the example Vinny also gave, it came to the mind, it jumped out to me as well. Example of a student that sometimes they're able to recognize certain terms or even words within specific contexts, and this shows how it's not just assessing them in one particular context. It shows that they're learning something. And the student knows these expressions because of the games, for example. The student plays games all the time. He knows how to use them. He can explain to me within the context of the game, because when he sees that word or that particular phrase, by using it, it gets him to another phase of the game.
right.
But outside of that game context, he could not explain it to me. So if this is the thing, when we're testing, we're assessing, or when we want to look at assessment, if I'm focusing on this discrete item, I'm really shortchanging my students, because if I don't give them the chance to see this in other contexts, look at how the same word is used in different ways. Look at how this word, and sometimes students do freak out by that, but it happens in every language. You show them this in Portuguese, show them this in English. Hey, we use language because language is vibrant, it's dynamic, and how people use it. And we can give them the example recently with the word cringe. Look at how cringe has been reused and adapted. Well, it's been used in a different way. So does it mean that it's complicated? To a certain extent, yes. But we have to know this, and this is when we're assessing students as well. Know that what am I going to assess them? Their capacity to use different strategies to communicate within different contexts. And that's what we want to do. And that it goes back to equipping them with these skills, equipping them with more autonomous kind of learning. That's what helps them. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, here comes Bruno. Here comes Bruno.
Here I am again.
Here she comes again. Jesus Christ. Here she comes.
Oh my God. Guys, no, I have another question. How about self assessment? What do you
Mhm.
think about it? Is it important? How can we teach our students to self assess themselves? I don't know. I need to know.
You need to know. Oh, yeah. Self-assessment only is good if the students are aware of what they're assessing, and they have to become literate in this idea of assessment as well. We talked about assessment literacy for teachers. We can talk about it for students as well, because if students have to, let's say, tell students, okay, give yourself a grade from 0 to 10 out of this class for this class. What do you think what was your performance like? Or if you could give yourself a grade, what would you give yourself? And most students would give themselves 10. But what criteria are you using? Oh, because whatever, or because they want to pass or whatever. So I have to teach them this. I have to show them what are we assessing. So I have to give them creating them this awareness. Maybe come up with criteria. It may involve a lesson where you sit with the students. Okay, what makes a good learner? What makes a good student? Or if you're going to be presenting at a conference, let's say you have a student presenting at a conference, what do you think makes a good presenter? What are some of the criteria? And they have to list those. Okay, so let's use these criteria now to assess your production, your presentations. Another quick example with students where um, lots of us are going out or have been teaching online, especially with high school, fundamental, senior med, and so on. So students have been watching a lot of videos, right? And I did this with my students. Okay, you're going to tell me what makes a good learning video. You've been watching lots of videos. You've been complaining the videos are horrible. What makes a good video? Well, so let's put up the criteria. So they had to come up with criteria for these videos. All right. And if if it was, let's say, applicable or not, if they could use it, if they could create a scale of 0 to 10 for each of these criteria. So what I was doing with them was giving them a chance to think of what it means to assess something, that they have to be aware of that. So that self-assessment, when I tell them, now you're going to assess yourself, these are it's a criteria, this is the rubric. It's something that they have to be aware of before. I can't just tell them, give me a grade from 0 to 10, right? So self-assessment is good if students know what they're doing, like teachers too. We have to know what we're doing. It has to be negotiable as well, I think. And it has to also encourage reflection. Students have to reflect. It's not just, okay, my grade was 7. Okay, but what did you learn from this? And what can you do next? So it's showing them what they need to learn for the next time, to set future goals for their learning. I think that's what it is, so self-assessment.
I just like to add that I think it's quite funny because we get young learners to assess themselves, and we kind of like grow out of it. I don't know. There are so many things that we do really well with young learners. We usually assess young learners holistically. We usually teach young learners in a much more communicative way through projects and through tasks. And then for some reason, we lose some of the good things that we do with young learners. I think self-assessment is great. I would just change Stefan's statement. Instead of using if, I would use because. I think self-assessment is great because students need to know what they're doing. So if teachers truly commit to this, it is a wonderful opportunity to develop awareness in learners, because I think that one of the most dangerous things that we can have in the classroom is a student who can't really perceive either how well they are doing or how much they need to work on. Then communication becomes really hard. And self-assessment, being able to assess yourself is a real skill. It's a competence. It's what I like to call in Portuguese. Jane, I'm going to try and do some free translation here, and you let me know if I'm doing all right. I like to translate awareness as noção, and sometimes tem falta de noção. And sometimes you look at that student and you say, "Dear, you're not that good. You need to work much harder." Sometimes it's the opposite. You look at a student and say, "But why are you so insecure? You're doing so well." So sometimes how students perceive themselves can be a real handicap. Sometimes students, their lack of awareness of how well they are doing might prevent them from doing better. And this distorted self-perception can be minimized if students are educated to assess themselves and have a more accurate view of their development. But I totally agree with Stefan that it's a long process, and I would only suggest we start doing it as early as possible. And if we're working with young learners, we continue doing it while they are teenagers. If we're working with adults, then we do it from the very first level, and we teach them how to look at the criteria, how to be critical, but also how to be kind to themselves and how to be realistic.
And this falta de noção could be due to many things, right?
Very good.
I mean, could be due to many things. I mean, low self-esteem is an issue, right? You know, if the person doesn't believe in themselves. I remember a student that had years ago, she was excellent. She was a university lecturer traveling all around the world, but she had this comment that she would always start the lesson off with, "I'm not good at languages. I'm better at mathematics." So she would always start like that, you know, and she was great, you know, but it's the self-esteem sometimes that atrapalha, right?
Very good point. You see, it gets in the way, and how students perceive themselves. It may seem very simple, but it's going to make a huge difference, really, in the end. How they assess.
And if we can establish good self-assessment, we can move on to peer assessment, and then the role of the teacher becomes lighter because you have different sources of assessment that should come together. Students assess themselves, they assess their peers, the teacher assess everyone, and then you have a collaborative environment because people are not
Mhm.
judging each other, but they are really truly, I know it sounds a
Helping each other.
little, idealistic, maybe
Uh-huh.
utopic, but people are truly working together to gather data and to support each other in their development by helping each other identify what they need to focus on, what they are doing really well, aiming at this greater good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is going to develop, everybody's going to learn. We're on the same boat, we're not competing, we're not ranking with numbers. Oh, and by the way,
Mhm.
self-assessment and peer assessment don't necessarily need to be grades. As we mentioned before, assessment is a global thing. So if anyone is thinking, oh, so I should get my students to give themselves grades, not necessarily. They can assess themselves by giving themselves feedback or giving feedback to their peers if it's peer assessment. I think
Mhm.
that it actually works better than limiting the assessment to a number.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, and you're giving them an opportunity as well. If you let's go into the world of work, for example, where nowadays assessment is 360, where you assess you let's say somebody you have to assess a class, a workmate, you get assessed from your immediate superior,
Mhm.
your boss. So this is great because you could develop a community of learning. You're giving students a chance to work with things that when they leave school or if they have to work, apply this to their work lives, it's going to be much easier. And they understand
Mhm.
what it means when they get feedback. Understand, because this also
Mhm.
develops this emotional intelligence as well. Because when I get
Mhm.
feedback, it's not, oh, I'm not criticizing you. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that you can't. I'm not saying that today you were not good enough. So then I tell students, hey, man, today you didn't get as many as you normally do, or today a little bit off. Is anything okay? Is everything all right? Are you feeling
Mhm.
okay? So sometimes, and it goes back to if you look at what happens in sports. Well, how many times do your favorite football player, your favorite basketball player, does he always get the basket? Does he always score the goal? No, sometimes he's not good today. So in the same way, you might not be very good today, but that doesn't mean you're not good enough. So it's understanding these differences, and this by doing self-assessment, doing peer assessment, students become much more aware of that. They understand the value of feedback. They don't take it as a criticism, but as
Mhm.
something to help them develop. It's a community of learning, basically.
Definitely. I think it's really important. And there are so many real life examples out there. Like I work with researchers and they send their papers to journals, and it's a long process of months of, toing and froing of it's been accepted, it hasn't been accepted, what's wrong with it. So you have to have a very open mind to receive the constructive criticism
That's right.
and self-assess why what am I doing wrong, how can I improve, so you have to have an open mind.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's
No,
it.
I remember sending lots of abstracts and getting them sent back. Say, no, it's not good enough. And you had all the criteria, and
Yeah.
they give you and they explain to you, well, it's not this, or you didn't cover this well, you didn't justify the points you wanted to explain or you wanted
Hmm.
to present. So this is important, understanding this and using this to help you move on.
Yeah,
Very
exactly.
good, very
Hmm.
good. Well, Bruno, go ahead.
Bruna.
Again, one more time.
Do it again. Here comes Bruno. Okay, Bruno.
Guys, yeah, I'd like to suggest um, something related to the topic because everybody got interested on watching you guys here today because of this title, assessment as learning. What does it mean?
Vinny, over
Okay.
to you.
Good.
Ta-da.
So let's go for assessment as learning. I think that a lot of what we've said so far already looks at assessment as learning. But for us to have a better comprehension of what it really entails, I think it's important for us to give a step back and look at the three different perspectives we have regarding assessment. We traditionally we used to look at assessment as a tool of learning. So assessment of learning, which is
Mhm.
the summative way of doing things. So we would look back and assess what was learned, what was not learned. So That would be assessment of learning, which is still very much part of what we do. It is kind of like our second nature, because most of us were assessed this way. And as teachers, we need to make peace to the fact that we, as much as we study and learn, and we're still very much influenced by all the teachers we had in the past, the ghost of
Mhm.
past teachers. they
Mhm.
they, they are all still living inside of us. So sometimes it's a bit harder than we would like to develop, different paradigms, and to really change the way we look at things. So assessment of learning is the most traditional, the most comfortable, the most natural thing that we do. We've been discussing for quite some time assessment for learning, which would be assessing students so that they can learn, right? So we've been trying to move from assessment of learning, which is past, it's done, it's evaluative, it's judgmental sometimes, it's a dead end, to something that looks forward. So assessment,
Mhm.
why do we assess? We assess for learning. We assess students so that they can learn better, which is the famous formative assessment. So
Right.
we would assess students summatively, looking back and checking if it was effective or not. And nowadays we've been making a conscious effort to try and assess learners in order to enhance their experience, to improve what we do, to give them more information so that they can make decisions and prioritize. So if we
Mhm.
can already go from assessment of learning to assessment for learning, that's already a great step.
Mhm.
Now, the ultimate goal, in my opinion, at least, I don't know if Jane and Stefan will agree with me, but it's when we can reach assessment as learning. And a lot of the ideas that we shared today are related to assessment as learning.
Right.
So when Jane suggested, for example, that students sit down together to do multiple choice activities, that's assessment, but it's part of the learning, because students are learning through the assessment. The assessment is not just a one-off event, but rather it's a piece of a bigger machinery. So while students are being assessed, they are also learning. It's not just to check what they learned, it's not just to tell us what they need to learn, but rather it's a moment in which they are also learning. So when we look at assessment as learning, we try to provide students with a very positive experience. We
Mhm.
try to allow them to uh, experience a moment of assessment as if they didn't even notice that they are being assessed, because
Mhm.
they really aren't, right? They're not being labeled. They are learning. It's just part of everything else that they do. And I don't know if Jane and Stefan agree with me that this is like a wonderful dream in education, or if there's anything that they would like to add to it. But
I
I'd
can
love to hear from you.
I
Yeah, you
completely
may.
agree. I think there needs to be a reform, and we need to look at more. We need to look at humanizing it, and taking away this stress, because life is stressful enough as it is, right? We don't need more stress. And we never know what's going on in our students' lives, if their parents are getting divorced, if somebody died in the family. We don't know the other side. And so there are stressful factors every day that happen. And learning should be enjoyable, I think. So the more that we can assess, the assessment as learning motto, the better.
Mhm. Yeah, no, no, this is great. I think what you said, moving from the of learning, for learning, and then we get to
Mm,
as learning. So yeah, you may say we are dreamers. Let's dream. Let's dream on. I think we can dream on about that, because to a certain extent, we can find examples. Let's say you had, so if you're looking at a school where there's a period of testing, right? There's 1 week of tests. And then the week after that, most students come to you and say, well, okay, we're not going to do anything because we had tests last week. So next week is just results, right? And you just give them results and then that's it. But
mhm,
assessment as learning could be an opportunity where tests have been, let's say you're using tests, be there no matter what they are. They could be actual multiple choice, they could be essay based, they could be projects, whatever. But there's a moment to go back and reflect and discuss these things. So If you give a quick example, what happens with lots of these quizzes, like Kahoot quizzes, Socrative, and all of these games, where you play the game with the students, but I'm saying this, most times we don't stop and go back and look at the results that were shared, because these tools do provide us with information. We can stop and say, well, the most difficult question was this one, and we go back and talk to the students. Hey, why was this difficult for you guys? What happened here? How did you feel when you did this? What choices you made? What made you choose A and not B? Right? We go back to the idea of the cheating, for example. Students cheat. Oh, I got it. I got the answer. So why do you think this is A and not B? Let's say you cheated, but why do you? Can you explain why it's this answer if you found it? So this is a chance as assessment as learning, because this is part of the process. And if we can take away, for example, a lot of times in face-to-face classes, we would have maybe the seats are always arranged like this in a circle, and when it's test week, all of them become lines. We put them into rows again. It's funny because like, wait a minute, we encourage them into interaction, and when it's test week, okay, back to the rows. Now you have to behave. You're on your own. But
For
what
example, why
about
can't they go out in the garden and do the test, right?
exactly? Why can't they go outside? Why can't they sit together? Why
why
all of
can't
a
I do my
sudden?
test at home?
Yes,
Yeah,
bring it in
exactly.
for me
which
afterwards.
was
Why not?
which was the whole drama with the pandemic, right? Because a lot of schools that had a more, I'm going to call traditional, maybe conservative, I don't
Mhm.
know the best word, but a lot of schools that had a more traditional framework for assessment panicked because
Yes.
they needed to have the chairs lined up. They needed to have somebody monitoring students. They needed to know that students are not checking their notes in order to feel that assessment was taking place. And then the moment we go into remote teaching, how do you do that? And I helped a lot of schools realize that they would have to really revisit. It was an opportunity for them to revisit their whole concept of assessment, because if they tried to simply imitate the face-to-face procedures, that would not be realistic. So they had to create more opportunities during the course to give students the chance to show what they were doing, what they were
Right.
producing, instead of that one particular moment. So yes, I couldn't agree more. But it's not just the garden; it's doing it at home as well, right?
Exactly. It's
Doing
an
it
ideal
home.
time to reflect on what everyone's doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Going back and reflecting on it. This is the thing. The assessment and learning has to do with the reflecting process of it, and it's not a let's say one event. It's happened. It's done. In the past, traditionally, picking up where Vinny left off, there, we said traditionally that's what happened. There was a test. It was applied. People got in their grades, and that's it. Nothing was done afterwards. Nothing was continued there. But opportunity to go back and look at the results and see, oh, what students are doing really well, what students are doing really badly, or what they still need work on. And also to see if maybe did they get it wrong because they couldn't do it, or was it because our questions, the way we designed the test, were not good enough? Maybe
Construct validity, as we say.
yes, did we actually create the content or test questions that would actually provide ways for students to do that? Was it kind of biased? Was it directing them into certain ways of saying things? So oftentimes when you go back and look at the test, like, whoa, this is a horrible question, because as a student, it's like, no, it's not helping me. It's very vague. But sometimes as teachers, we think we're doing the right thing. So this is what assessment as learning is for the student and for the teacher. It's for the student,
Absolutely.
for the teacher, for parents, for the school. What are we doing as a school? If we go back to that remote teaching now, what are we doing as a school in terms of assessment? How does it work? So did they have to go online, and students had to go online, access it at that particular time, for example, so to reduce the points of the opportunity for them to cheat. Um, Again, what is that? What does that mean to cheat? How do you define this idea of learning, and so on? So this is what we mean by assessment as learning.
I'd like
Opportunities
to
for more.
I'd like to, since we're talking about assessment as learning, I think
Yeah.
that there was a question from Carolina,
Uh-huh.
which kind of like is a great springboard for us to just delve into this a little bit further. Carolina, she shares with us that she used to have a 75-year-old student with lots of listening problems, and she tried different techniques, but it was very hard for her. And then she thought her English was horrible because of that. And then she moves on to ask us, how could she assess her listening and still help her see the other things that she was good at? Because she was always afraid of making her feeling worse because her listening had an impact on her self esteem. Um, w- Based on this whole idea of um, yes, Carol, yes. So your question is quite specific, but it's very much connected to assessment as learning. And I think it's an important question because we do want students to feel their best, right? And sometimes we have different students with different challenges. And I'd love to hear Jane and Stefan explore a little bit this idea. If a student, whether it's a 75-year-old student or any other student, if they have greater difficulties in one specific area, how can we go about the assessment?
Yeah, I
Good.
think empathy is always key, isn't it? Putting yourself in your student's shoes. So maybe she was hard of hearing, she had hearing problems. Maybe you can concentrate on the other senses, and but also finding different ways to communicate, you know?
Hmm. And I think also you could add to that maybe testing different types of audio sources. So let's say, I don't know what listening material she was using. So not just accents, but the type of listening activities. So it could be from interviews to talk shows to conversations, and getting to see and actually doing a bit of a test to see if how well the student is reacts to different types of listening activities, different sources. Um, because sometimes, and this might not happen as just a 75-year-old student, but sometimes students think their listening is horrible, but you can also show them that, hey, I don't understand what the guy is saying either. I listen, I watch some TV series, I don't understand it. I'm watching a TV series with people from speaking Irish. They have Irish accents. I don't understand them. So it's not on you all the time, but it's all the idea of familiarity. Listening skills has to do with familiarity. The more familiar you are with the way people talk, how they put the words together and everything, it helps, right? So
I would
different
like.
skills, listening, reading, writing, speaking. You have to look at what they work on. This side of the empathy would work definitely, but also giving them other things, using other resources to see how they react to that, how well they perform, and build their confidence from there. Yeah, go ahead.
And I'd just like to add, I think you both of you gave wonderful advice. I'd like to add maybe on top of what you said, that maybe the work on strategies would be really important instead of assessing the skill of listening, assessing the use of strategies. So really preparing the students for the listening, creating a moment of success, even if the work before the listening is so detailed and so thorough that the student doesn't really understand from the listening. She kind of like just confirms because she did all the work before the listening, but that would definitely boost her confidence. And it's here, I think it's really a matter of confidence, right? So making her feel that she can. So doing some pre-listening work that is really thorough, that would help her implement strategies, try to anticipate, try to guess, guide her a little bit more so that she feels successful in the listening. And also adjusting expectations. I think it has to do with what Jane and Stefan mentioned. Maybe with a more comfortable student in terms of listening, you would play the listening twice, and you would play the whole thing in one go. Maybe with that student, you would play just the first two sentences, and you would help her with these two sentences, and then gradually break it down less and less. Really scaffolding, which is something that we briefly mentioned previously, but changing the way that you teach that to adjust your expectations and her expectations regarding the listening, right? So I think that these are some ideas, Carol. I hope we've been able to help you.
Oh yeah, no, and just picking up what you mentioned there, Vinny, this thing about the strategy and pre-listening. Sometimes I even like to say that pre-listening is part of listening. I don't even call it pre; it's listening. All of that is in the listening package because sometimes even in real life, let's say students have to go and they have to present or they have to participate in a conference. They have to be briefed before. Our world leaders, they don't go to summit without being briefed. They don't go just going, oh, let me just talk to people. And sometimes they're going to talk in their own language, but they have to be briefed. So pre-listening activities are briefing your students what to
Mm-hmm.
expect, how to work, what happens if the guy says this, what he doesn't say this. If you hear this, what would you do? Right? You're preparing them, giving them the tools that they can use within that context. So it's a whole kit actually, like a toolkit really of things
Mm-hmm.
that they can rely on when they're interacting with the content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. Here she comes. Here she comes again.
Getting to the
Oh
end,
God.
unfortunately. But
Jesus.
guys, what a great conversation. It was amazing. I would
We're done
like to thank
already.
you all. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was great. I learned a lot from you. And I'm sure that everybody could enjoy and learn with me. It was great. It was great. Thank you
Can
very
I
much.
invite can I invite everyone who enjoyed it to come and study at Stasu to because
Please
we
do
talk
that.
we
You
talk about
did.
assessment, and I would love to continue talking about assessment. If you enjoyed our conversation here, please
Please
come and
do.
see us.
Please.
And we all talk about different things, but I happen to talk about assessment. So I would love these people who are interested in assessment. I would love to have you as my students.
Definitely.
Yes.
Great.
Oh
It's
yeah.
Vinicius' subject at
Yeah.
Postasio.
That's
Yes.
Uh-huh.
right.
It's
Yeah, I
great.
talk about technology and the use of technology, but in that I also talk about literacy and assessment as literacy. So, but from the technological aspect of things, tools and this stuff. So, I would love to talk about that as well. It's
Mhm.
great, great, good invitation.
These
I love
are
that invitation,
great
Vinny.
teachers, great professionals, great people. I love you all. You're
Oh.
amazing. And thank you very much, guys, for being here with us.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, as Vinicius said, we have this great course. It's Ensino de Língua Inglesa at Pós Estácio. And we
Oh,
have,
thank you,
yes,
Luciana.
Luciana. I have already studied at Stasio. Stefan was my teacher. Very nice.
Thank you, thank you.
Stefan was my teacher too.
Now you see, revealing my age. See? There you go.
Yeah, a long time ago, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's it. I would like to invite you all, as Vinicius said, we're having a new group. It's going to be on August 21st. Yes, the new group. And guys, the news, the very, very good news that we have here is that you have a 30% of discount till July
Seven.
30th.
Yep.
Yes? Till July 30th. Okay.
Mhm.
Carol is going to write here the code. So if you just register to be there with us in this group, this is the code: mini curso 30. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much,
Thank
guys.
you.
It was amazing. Thank you.
No, we could
Thank
go
you.
on and on. You realize that, right? We could go
Yeah,
on and on and on.
The whole
Yeah.
it
night.
was perfect. It
Thank you,
was
Jane.
perfect.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Bruna.
Thank you,
Thank
Vinny,
you all,
Jane,
Vinny, Stefan,
Bruna.
Bruna, and
Very
everyone
good.
who came to
Who
watch
Yeah,
and
thanks to everybody
participate.
coming up. Yeah, and the
Yeah,
questions too. I don't know if there were so many questions. I don't know if we were able to
Yeah.
cover all of them, but maybe we could go back and look at the chat and
Yeah.
talk about that in future discussions and stuff. That would be
yeah.
great.
And in the course, Vinicius' subject
Yeah.
is about this. So if you want to know more about assessment, just come with us.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Bye
All right.
Thank
bye.
you.
See you.
Bye.
Have a nice week. Bye.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
See ya.
Thank you. Bye.